Assalamu alaikum, this is Dr. Mona Al-Idrisi, author of the Muslim Narcissist book and empowerment coach for Muslims. I know it's been a minute, I've been very busy, but I'm back now with lots of content inshallah for you. And today's podcast will be about the Muslim psychopath. So this will be a follow-up from my last podcast, and I will take a deeper dive into the psychopathic mind. We've done a lot already on the narcissistic mind and codependency and other disorders, but I want to hone in more on the psychopath's mind because many of you are suffering with these people. And the aim of this podcast, inshallah, is to give you closure, give you some understanding of how these people operate and how they think, where their traumas come from, and also how best to deal with them and protect yourselves from them. Okay, because like I said, it's a very difficult personality type to deal with and also move on from and heal from. And I also intend with this podcast to help psychopaths understand their disorder, their trauma, understand why they are the way they are, so that inshallah they could be motivated to take the necessary steps for change and healing. And I'm hoping that there are some curious psychopaths out there who will listen, because I do believe people can change. Islam teaches us that. I don't believe it's impossible. I believe the worst of people can change if they want to and if they make the right efforts for that. So this podcast is going to be filled with lots of examples of psychopathic behaviour, and this will be triggering for psychopaths and also triggering for victims. So please be warned, if you're not ready to listen to it, don't listen to it, because psychopathic abuse is very satanic. And the subject of psychopathy is so big, I've split this into 2 podcasts. So today's podcast, inshallah, will be about the traumatised psychopath, and inshallah the next podcast I release will be about the malignant religious psychopath. Now, before we jump in, as always, I'd like to kindly ask you to like the podcast if you found it helpful. Do share it with people whom you feel could benefit from this information. Do click the subscribe button if you want to be notified about the future podcasts I release. And if you need one-to-one counselling and coaching, there is a link below in the description box to my website where you can read all the information about it. And you can also submit an application form. And then once I receive it, I'll contact you and we can take it from there. And if you haven't read the book yet, please do grab a copy. Alhamdulillah, so many people found it helpful. You'll find lots of answers in there. And know that these podcasts are supplementary to the book. So the foundational information is all in there. And I create these podcasts to elaborate on many of the points I've made in the book. Okay? You can also sign up to the mailing list on the website to receive emails about news and courses and also podcast releases. So just pop your email in there and inshallah you'll get those. And if you're new here to the channel, I'd like to welcome all the new members. I pray that this channel gives you closure, healing, knowledge and everything you need to understand yourselves and other people. And if you have any questions, you can just pop them under the podcast and inshallah I'll get back to you whenever I can. And I think that's everything. I'm feeling a bit rusty because I haven't recorded intros in a while, so it's taking a bit longer than usual. So please do bear with me. And I will also try to shorten the podcasts whenever I can to make them easier to listen to and process, as I know many of you are on the go. So make dua that I manage to. Right, so without further ado, let's jump in. So according to the levels of nafs, and as I've mentioned before, the psychopath is on the lowest end. And they come after malignant narcissists and also with sociopaths. I'll do another podcast, inshallah, just about the sociopaths because their disorder is slightly different but also as dangerous. So you have the malignant narcissist, and then the traumatised psychopath, and then the malignant psychopath, and this category also includes the malignant religious psychopaths and also the sociopaths, and then Iblis. So no one is worse than Iblis because Iblis saw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he lived in Jannah, and despite everything he saw and everything he knows, he still decided to do what he did And his arrogance is a whole category on its own. Inshallah, I'm going to do another podcast about Iblis and why Allah gave him a very long chance until the Day of Judgment. Okay, he is the one who has the longest standing chance to repent amongst everyone ever created. And there's a reason for that. So inshallah, we will come on to Iblis in the final stage. I've already done a podcast about Iblis, but the next one inshallah will be from a different perspective. And it will help you to understand why psychopaths are the closest to Iblis and why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them a long life to change and repent. Okay, if you notice, psychopaths do have a longer life than other people. You'll often wonder, why do the most evil people live to very old age? There's a reason for that. Okay, why does Allah give them a chance? There's a reason. It's because they will have a trait of Iblis in them, and life will humble them. Allah will give them so many humbling experiences until they are broken down in old age. If you go back to my previous podcast, I explained that. But there are also other reasons for it, and inshallah I will explain to you why their long lives benefit the believers. Okay, you may think it's a curse, you may think it's a crisis and a disaster, but actually it benefits the believers for them to have a long life. So inshallah we will come on to that. Now the difference between all of these people with this disorder of psychopathy and sociopathy is that sometimes their root causes are different. And if the root causes are the same, then what drives them is different. Okay, so some of them are intentionally evil, and some of them are evil because of what happened to them. They've normalized evil behaviour, but they don't intend to be evil. They've just turned psychopathic, but they believe that the way they are is normal. So it's a level of delusion where they believe they are good people, but their behaviour is abhorrent. But they genuinely believe in their hearts that they're doing the right thing, that the way they are is normal. And what brings them all together, the common factor between all of them, is that they are slaves to their qareens. Okay? And that is why a lot of their behavior is similar. That is why their behavior is satanic. And it's also why their understanding of Islam is extreme. They're either liberal or they're very strict. Scholar Makhlad ibn al-Hussein radiallahu anhu said, ما ندب الله العباد إلى شيء إلا طرد فيه إبليس بأمرين ما يبالي بأيهما ظفر إما غلوا فيه وإما تقصيرا عنه. Allah never recommends something to his servants but that shaitan interferes with it in one of two ways. He does not care which of them succeeds. Either he makes them exaggerate in it, so they become overly strict like the Khawarij, and they make Islam unbearable for people, or he makes them belittle it, so they become too liberal and they water the deen down so that it loses its value. So both liberalism and extremism are from Iblis. So of course those who follow Iblis and worship Iblis subconsciously through their qareen, because they worship their qareen and listen to their qareen all the time, and they act upon what the qareen tells them all the time, they think like Iblis because they've adopted his mindset. Okay, that's why they're all very similar, either this way or that way. And they're very similar to Iblis in traits as well. All of that's written in detail in the book. I've broken it down so that you can see all the similarities between them. So like I said, today we're going to speak about the traumatized psychopath, who is the person who believes they're a good person and that they're doing the right thing, but they've normalized psychopathic behavior, and this is the most common psychopath you can come across. Lots of people are married to them, lots of people have these psychopaths as parents, as siblings, as employers, and so on. So it's important for you to understand what exactly you're dealing with. Okay? Now, many studies have shown that there are common root causes for this personality disorder. And the first one is coming from a very dysfunctional family. Okay, when you have no stability as a child, especially when it's emotional and mental stability, you can process toxic behavior as being normal and implement that in your own life. So for example, you might see your father as a very controlling man, and you observe how he's treated your mother for so many years. He's possessive, he's suffocating, he doesn't let her do anything, he follows her everywhere, he tracks her phone, he tracks her car, he's like that. And then you grow up thinking that this is normal. When I get married, I'll be the same. The same with your siblings, right? If they have psychopathic behaviour where they, switch from different moods instantly, where they're lashing out, they have tantrums, and then they switch off and they can be completely normal after 5 minutes. They think, wow, this is normal. Or maybe when you see someone be very aggressive or very violent, and then they seriously hurt somebody, and they just go on about their day, they go and get an ice cream, like nothing happened. They don't take these things seriously. When you see people do that consistently, you normalize it in your mind as a child. So you grow up with that trauma being the base of your programming, and then you act in the same kind of ways subconsciously throughout your adulthood. And it's also the same with women. When you observe women going crazy, absolutely losing their marbles, screaming, shouting, yelling, and then after 5 minutes they're absolutely fine, they're normal, or they lash out physically, you later normalize women being physically aggressive. And sometimes as the victim, you can accept that if you had a mother like that. You could marry a woman who is physically aggressive because your mum was like that, and you've normalized it and you tolerate it and accept it for years because your programming has led you to accept this psychopathic behavior. So it affects the victims, and it also affects people who become psychopaths. Psychopaths normalize it and victims tolerate it. And sometimes the psychopathic behavior you saw in your parents will show up in your employer or your best friend or the people you associate with on a day-to-day basis. And you're comfortable with it because you've normalized it. You see it as normal. Okay, and that's why you don't see anything wrong with it. You just deal with it. And then it's only years later you realize how much it's affected you and your self-worth and your self-esteem and your faith and your perception of Allah and everything. Even your understanding of Islam becomes completely distorted because you've normalized being around people like this and you've normalized their behavior. So coming from a very dysfunctional family where the members are expressing and displaying very toxic behavior is the number one reason. The second one is sexual abuse in childhood. Okay, so anger and unprocessed emotions can be dangerous to the mindset of someone who does not understand why that happened to them. Okay, they're angry that people didn't protect them. They're angry people didn't listen. They are angry at the people who turned a blind eye to what was happening. Maybe they spoke out about it and people ignored them. Maybe their mother ignored it. Maybe their father was, doing all sorts of horrible things to them, or their uncle or their cousin or their neighbour or someone trusted like an imam, and they complained about it and they told someone about it and those people didn't do anything about it. That anger festers in the hearts of these people and they take it out on people later in their adulthood. They take it out on religious people. They take it out on their family members. They take it out on people who resemble their family members. Maybe a psychopath will marry someone who resembles the mother who was silent about the sexual abuse and didn't stand up for them. They will take out the abuse on this woman who reminds them of their mum. And sometimes they will actively look for a woman who is just like the mother so that they can take out all their wrath on her. And sometimes it's the opposite. A woman will seek out a man who is like her father or like the person who abused her as a child and take out her wrath on him. And the reason why they do that is because they can't do it to their parents. If they were to do that to their parents, the whole community would stand against them and they would look like the villain. They don't want to be the villain because in their hearts they believe that they are the victims, and they are the victims. They are victims of sexual abuse that happened to an innocent child. So they don't want the script to be flipped and them to be seen as the villains, so they cannot abuse their parents. Everyone in the community would, hold them accountable for it. They would be seen as monsters. So the next best thing is to find people who resemble their abusers from childhood and take it all out on them. And this is why psychopaths will either marry Very soft women who can't stand up for themselves or can't stand up for other people, like their mothers when they were silent against the abuse that they complained about. Or they marry women who they completely crush and break down. Okay, as again, it's punishment for this type of woman because of what they had to go through in their childhood. I have now set it as a challenge to break down this exact type of person, this imam, this religious teacher, this auntie, this cousin who was a CEO, who was, they had a high position in society. I want that type of person because through this person, I get to punish my abuser. So they go for someone who's very similar. And this is the reason why many of you will marry someone who hates you from day one. You've done nothing to them, nothing at all. But you'll feel that from day one, they married you already hating you. And then they turn out to be psychopathic and they punish you for no reason whatsoever. They just actively make your life a living hell, like you have abused them all their life. They treat you like that. And it's because they're seeing something that you can't see. When they look at you, they're reminded of their abuser, and these marriages are always short-lived. Okay, they don't last very long. When they are satisfied with the amount of punishments they've put you through, they might let you go after that. If they're not satisfied, then these relationships will be long-term, depending on how much the victim tolerates. Okay? Now, the malignant narcissist, the one who is worse than this type of narcissist, will actively choose pure people because their anger is on a different spiritual level. Okay, so this level of psychopathy makes people search for their abusers and other people to punish and those who didn't stand up for them. Whereas the malignant level of psychopathy makes people look for the innocent and the pure to punish because they want other people to go through the same traumas they went through to feel better. So they put people through the same cycle of abuse so that it continues throughout generations. So instead of standing up for justice and standing against these abusers, they just look for the same innocent children to do the same thing to, because they believe that if they deserved it, then everyone else deserves it as well. No one can be better than them, not even their own children. Right, you get lots of parents like that. You get fathers and mothers like that. They will do the most abhorrent things to their children because it happened to them. They're like, well, just suck it up, deal with it. That's what I went through as a child. I didn't complain. I went through the same thing. You're going to go through what I went through. You're going to get the same beating. You're going to get the same sexual abuse. You're going to get the same emotional abuse, religious abuse, everything that I went through. You're going to go through it as well. That's the malignant psychopath. So that's the difference when it comes to sexual abuse. Okay, that's what they look for when it comes to searching for a new victim, whether they're traumatized or whether they're malignant. There's a saying which goes, the more you hide your feelings, the more deeply you feel them. So if people grow up being unable to express themselves or speak to anyone, the feelings will manifest into dangerous actions. Okay? For example, look at that Netflix documentary about the Menendez brothers. It's called Monsters. It's about two brothers who were sexually abused by their father, and the mother turned a blind eye to it, and they eventually murdered their parents. Okay, this is what it can lead to. When they have to stay silent for the sake of the family, for the sake of the reputation, for the sake of not exposing things and exposing themselves as well. They don't want people to know that they were sexually abused by their parents. The suppression can cause people to become malignant, and that's why so many people murder their parents. You see it in the news all the time, that the young nerdy son who lives in the basement of his parents' house murdered them. And they've been murdered for weeks. People started asking about them, and then they found out that their son or their daughter killed them. It's because of accumulated suppression, of oppression that happened to them when they were young. There's also the case of them being severely possessed by jinn that can cause them to do things like that, and that's another topic for another day. But the malignant psychopath is the most likely to attract the most malignant jinns to them. Inshallah, we'll go into that later. But these people do come with spiritual issues. And they all have terrible waswas. Awful waswas. The worst satanic whisperings you could think of. Because their qareens have taken advantage of them, harbouring all of these suppressed emotions. So the qareen starts to whisper, oh, you should do this, you should do that. They fuel more hate for people and so on and so forth until they start acting out what they've been told to do. Okay? So that's the second cause. And this is in no order of, importance or priority or, of things that actually happen to people. I'm just listing the things that happen to psychopaths at a young age that causes them to become the way they are. The third one is physical abuse. So if they were subjected to very harsh physical abuse as children, the anger that comes with that as well will manifest into acts of revenge. Okay, they will fantasize about revenge. They will fantasize about killing their parents in the future. They'll fantasize about doing sihr on people. They'll fantasize about harming people. And that could be physical harm, religious harm, spiritual harm, whatever it is. People can grow up with fantasies of seriously harming those who abuse them. And that, of course, affects their nafs, affects their faith, affects how they function in life. And they take it out on people as well. So in this category, when this is the cause, they look for people who are easily abused, who can be a punching bag. They go for weak people, vulnerable people, people who have low self-esteem, low self-worth. And again, that's why you'll often find psychopaths with the softest of spouses, the softest of children who they physically abuse. And unfortunately, because physical abuse is so intimidating, it scares victims into staying. And they don't just stay, they stay long term. Okay, so this psychopath now has an outlet for their trauma, and they take it out on these poor people because they can't do that to their parents. Again, if they come from a religious community, they're not going to be beating up their parents. They're not going to be punching their fathers and, physically assaulting their mothers, because the whole community will come together and get them arrested and punished and all of that. But if they marry someone with low self-esteem and low self-worth, they can manipulate them into accepting it long term by scaring them. And this is how they turn malignant. Okay, physical abuse can turn very dark very quickly. And the victims of these psychopaths are the ones who end up, being murdered by these people. The longer they stay, the more dangerous it gets. And inshallah, in the next podcast, I'll speak about that. I'll speak about the kind of people who do end up getting murdered by psychopaths. And it's scary. It's a really triggering subject. It's not a pleasant subject to speak about, but it's important that we do, because lately there have been so many reports and cases and stories of women especially who are being murdered at the hands of their husbands, their uncles, their fathers, and so on. Okay? The fourth reason is being bullied at school. So if a child was, he was fine at home, but he was bullied at school because he was too skinny, or because, he had orange hair, or for whatever reason, violent thoughts towards his bullies will be constant in his mind. And again, that festers into fantasies of revenge and so on. So being bullied at school can cause a psychopath to grow up with very low self-esteem and very low self-worth, and their insecurities are taken out on everybody. And they are more likely to turn malignant if they had a toxic home and they were bullied at school. But if they were fine at home and they were just bullied at school, then it will just fuel insecurities when it comes to their social life and also how they see themselves. So they may have been normal and great kids, but they were negatively affected by the opinions of others and the harsh words of children they actually admired. So what psychopathic people do is that they take a mental note of everything that they got picked on for, and they use it as motivation to do so well in life, but not for a good reason. It's for revenge. So they work very hard in life to get to where they want to be. They might become CEOs, successful business owners, prime ministers. They might be famous surgeons, people famous on social media, famous scholars who travel the world, just people whom others look up to and praise and validate all the time. So they're always in a position where they have the upper hand, they have the most amount of power they can get, and then they crush the ants. If you look into the autobiographies of many CEOs, you'll notice that many of them were bullied at school, and now they feel like they have something to prove. But again, like I said, it's not for a good cause. They don't do khair with it. They do it to bully people, they do it to crush people, they do it to have power over people because it's their time to shine after everything they went through in their childhood. So it's almost like a slap in the face to everyone who told them they're stupid, they're ugly, they're too skinny, they can't do this, they can't do that. They're like, oh, just wait. Just give me 20 years, honey, and I'll show you what I'm going to do to you. Tomorrow I'm going to be your employer. Tomorrow I'm going to be your CEO. Just watch what I'm going to do. So they're very successful because they're very driven, but the cause is not good. But this is how they release that trauma. They find so much satisfaction in what they do. They become workaholics and they're psychopathic at work. They're known to be psychopaths at work because they love stamping on everybody. It gives them that satisfaction. Like, yes, I can finally do this to other people after everything people have done to me. Okay? The next reason is being raised in a violent environment. So it doesn't have to be the home, it could be the area. If you were raised in the ghetto, where you saw people getting shot and stabbed all the time, where you saw people taking drugs, self-harming, rapes, all that kind of stuff. If you saw people constantly committing crimes, it normalizes it in your mind and you can become psychopathic. You can lose all your empathy and pursue this way of life. This is very common. The next reason is no love from parents. So you may have had a great education, everything you needed, a great home, you live in a great area, everything was fine, but you had absent parents or emotionally unavailable parents. You had a mother who wasn't affectionate or warm. You had a father who was very strict and tough on you because he wanted you to do well in life. You couldn't talk to anyone. You couldn't get love from anyone. So this creates a very cold void in somebody, and they grow up not knowing what warmth is and not knowing what love is, especially unconditional love. So they look for it in other people in adulthood. And that's when they look for parental relationships. They look for somebody who can either be their parent or who they can parent. And it depends on the dynamic that they went through. But that's why so many psychopaths will treat you like you're their child. And they demand love. They demand respect without earning it from you. And no one is to be given that love and respect without earning it first, because you can't respect a clown, okay? You can't respect idiots. They have to earn respect to be treated in the way that they want to be treated. You can't expect to be an idiot and then have everyone respect you. Respect and love are both earned. So psychopaths, because they don't understand that, they demand it from people and it can become unbearable. They become possessive. They become obsessed with being loved and spoiled and pampered and admired and respected. But they never learned how to earn it. They never learned that level of softness that would cause people to naturally want to do those things and treat them that way. So because they didn't have it from their parents when they were younger, they demand it from their spouses in adulthood. And it can become so unbearable because they want it all the time. But you're dealing with someone so unhinged, so immature, so cruel, so horrible, so rude, but yet they still demand that respect. I am the emir of the house, I must be respected, but he can't do jack for you. He's useless. There's nothing he can do that would make you respect him. Or she's, yelling and screaming every 5 minutes. She's yelling or screaming about something, and you're just like, what's there to respect? But they demand love, they demand respect, they demand all of that because they didn't get it from their parents. And this is a trauma that they carry with them that no one can heal apart from themselves. They have to accept that their parents were just those types of people. It didn't mean that they were not lovable or not worthy, but they took it that way. They took it personally, they absorbed it, they internalized it, and then they had to go through life believing that they were worthy and they were lovable by forcing people to be the way that they wanted their parents to be. Because if they could make people do it, then it just confirms in their minds that they are worthy. Because they've never learned how to earn it. They can only demand it because they're still in childhood trauma mode. So I hope that makes sense. But that's one of the traumas that can make people psychopathic because it fuels an obsession. And when people become obsessed about getting things from people, it can make them very weird in their behaviour. They start stalking, they start acting in strange ways, they start doing things around the house, like following you, creeping around, following you into the bathroom, following you into the kitchen because they want to know what you're doing, because they've now become so obsessed with getting what they need from you. They'll even sit in the bathroom and watch you on the toilet just because they can't leave you alone for 5 minutes. Remind me of how much you love me and how much you want me and how great I am and this and that. But you struggle to do those things because of how they are. You are so creeped out by them by that point. You want out, but you can't escape, but they're demanding all these things from you and they want it all the time. This obsession, and any obsession, causes people to become weird. And when they become weird, the relationship breaks down even more, which makes them even more obsessed about what you're doing, where you're going. Are you cheating on me? Are you losing feelings for me? No, you must love me. You must want me. I can't live like this. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse until you end up losing your marbles in the process. Okay? Now, some people don't experience a trauma until later in life. So some psychopaths, they're fine in their childhood, and then an experience in adulthood causes them to become psychopaths. For example, they might lose their status suddenly, or they might experience bankruptcy, or they might be cheated on. Okay, sometimes, especially when men are cheated on, it can make them turn very dark. Okay, they will be absolutely fine. They'll give a woman their absolute all. They'll be loyal, devoted, committed. They'll invest in her. They'll give her all the money in the world, everything she wants. And then, one day, he finds out that she's cheated on him. Oh, his whole world will flip. He'll turn very dark. Iblis will come into his mind. Well, the soldier of Iblis. And all that's on his mind is now revenge. This happens to women too. Being cheated on can turn people very dark. Losing everything they love can make them go crazy. It can make people suicide. It can make people violent, aggressive, because they're thinking now, what have I got to lose? I've lost everything. I have nothing left. My business is gone. My status is gone. I've been exposed. I've been humiliated. I've lost my position. I've been fired. I've lost this. I've lost that. I've lost my family. What's there to lose, huh? The people who are feared the most are those who have nothing to lose, because they just go out all guns blazing. I don't care what happens to me. I don't care if I get jailed. I don't care if I get killed. I don't care what happens to me after this, because I have nothing to lose. So they might physically assault the person who cheated on them. They might murder that person. They might do something so erratic and out of character because their qareen has now fully taken over. Sometimes, someone will go through an experience where someone who they were very committed to and loved very much left them for someone else. Or they just decided that, I don't want to be with you anymore. I've lost feelings for you. I want out. That can traumatize them so much that when they get into the next relationship after that, it can cause them to be a living nightmare for that person. because they are now learning all the mistakes that they made the first time round, and they become suffocating in the second one. They won't trust you. They'll be detached emotionally. They'll follow you. They will track you. They will always be paranoid that you're going to leave. And that's how they become unbearable to live with. Okay, they're making you pay for what someone else put them through, because they fear that it's going to happen to them again, and in the process they become psychopaths. That's what happens when someone goes through a trauma in early adulthood or mid-adulthood. They can just switch because they don't know how to deal with that emotionally. It's such a crash, it's such a disaster, that it just turns them 180. They lose everything. They lose their iman, they stop praying, they lose their health, they go downhill. They could be taking drugs to cope, alcohol. They could go spiraling down a very, very deep rabbit hole because they don't know how to cope with that particular trauma, and they haven't found the support and the help that they've needed in that time, and they didn't have enough faith to carry them through to a healing stage. They were just very emotionally charged and driven to deal with it. Now, some people also, and when I say people, I mean psychopaths, they will jump into a new relationship after a failed one like this to prove to the ex that people can love them and want to stay with them. But what the new person doesn't know yet, they are doing everything in their capability to stop this person from leaving. So, for example, if they gave the ex lots of freedom before, the new one's not going to have any freedom. The new one will have to wear a niqab. The new one cannot go out with her friends. The new one cannot drive her own car. The new one can no longer work. You see, because he or she, they're now seeing these as the reasons that caused the ex to leave them. So they now have to block every exit so that you don't leave. And if they do allow you certain freedoms, sometimes after intervention and mediation, then they will track you. They will constantly be on your back to make sure that you have no plan to leave them. That you have no plan to leave them for someone else, you're talking to someone else, and so on and so forth. And that's why the new person ends up running away as well, and that fuels their trauma all over again. So if it happens to them a second time, that's when they really turn malignant, okay? Because you are now triggering every negative belief that they've been carrying with them since childhood. They're not worthy. But they're not looking at their own behaviour as psychotic, right? They're not seeing that everything that they're doing is abnormal and it's fueling people to run from them and leave them. Because when someone is like this, it becomes unbearable. So they will pull all the tricks, and sometimes they'll use Islam to do this. So they might start saying things like, in Islam, a woman has to obey her husband. She can't work. She can't go out with her friends. She can't go and see her family without his permission. She can't do this. It's fard to cover your face. It's fard to do this and it's fard to do that. You can't travel anywhere without me and all of that. So they're using Islam as a cover to stop you from leaving them so that you're always trapped with them. And yes, they do try to make you have lots of children. They'll trap you in other ways. But it's usually when they've had a very bad experience before and they never want to feel that way again. And there's no love in these kind of relationships, right? The second time round, there's no love. It's just for him or her to prove to themselves that I can make this person stay. I can make this person do exactly as I want them to. They will love me. They will respect me. And I'm going to prove to people that I can be loved and respected. That I'm not the problem. She was the problem. My ex was the problem. So a lot of people, a lot of women are in relationships with men just like this. I hear it all the time. And of course, I speak for both men and women here. This is very common behaviour, which is very worrying. People think that the empaths who are miserable are only married to narcissists. A lot of them are married to psychopaths as well. some of them malignant, but most of them, the traumatised psychopath. And some people as well, and this is the last point, as a reason for this, psychopathic behaviour, is resenting the upbringing they had. So, for example, if they were raised poor, while others around them were raised with money, they had luxury lifestyles or they had comfortable lifestyles, especially when these people are family members and friends. Okay, they go to school and they realise that they're the poorest child in the class. Or how is it that my father's brothers all have wealthy lifestyles, but we're poor? Why is it that my mother's brother is so wealthy, but he doesn't help us, but he spends money on so many other things? Why this and why that? And sometimes it's low status. Maybe the family you come from is considered to have a low class or a low status in society, and you resent that because people automatically judge you for it and disrespect you. You grew up with an inferiority complex because of the culture you came from, the ethnicity you have, the country you came from. If you have an inferiority complex, it's usually inherited, right? It's passed down through generations. And you can hate belonging to a certain ethnicity or culture because you see people look down upon that culture or see it as a lower culture where others are more superior. So that resentment can fester into wanting to be completely different, wanting to desperately be rich, wanting to desperately be worthy. And when you get into adulthood, that's your only focus, because you desperately want this feeling of having an inferiority complex to go away. So you work super hard to become filthy rich or famous or someone people look up to or someone of very high status. For example, you work so hard to become the mayor, to become the president, to become the prime minister, to become the CEO, to become a very rich business owner. You work so hard day and night to cover the inferiority complex so that people no longer see you as disadvantaged. They don't look at your culture. They're not looking at your low social status. They're not looking at poverty anymore. They're looking at your wealth, your fame. They're admiring you for other things that you believe elevates you in society. Now, when someone comes from this traumatic background, okay, it's a trauma for some people. It may not be for you or for whoever's listening, but for many people, this is a trauma. And they are driven by their trauma to be so successful in life, and they will do anything to get that. Okay, they will do anything to get that success. They will trample on everybody. No empathy. Okay, there's no mercy, there's no compassion, there's no integrity in what they do. They just have to get there no matter what. So they trample on everyone, they scam people, they commit fraud, they might even commit sihr. Okay, whatever it takes to be rich and have a higher status and get to where they want to be to get rid of that inferiority complex. Okay, so psychopathic behavior does emerge. And that's why the modern psychologists claim that psychopaths are people who are highly intelligent, they just lack empathy. So, for example, if you look at the best CEOs and business owners, they're classified as being psychopaths because they had to trample on people to get there. They had to, do everything and pull out all the stops to get to that level of success. So the modern definition of psychopath is that kind of person who gets to where they want to be because they're smart, but they do it with no empathy. Okay? So this is why a lot of people admire psychopaths and they aspire to be like them, because people who have empathy don't tend to achieve that level of success because they consider other people, they have compassion, they have mercy. They will not take advantage of people, scam people, commit fraud. They won't do those things to reach the same level of success as psychopaths do. So people look up to them and they want to learn from them. And if you learn anything good from this type of psychopath, it's to turn your trauma and pain into success. But you have to do it in a way that's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They do not. But if you can learn how to do that, you turn your pain into success by pleasing Allah in the process, you've won. Instead of just wallowing and, oh, woe to me, and that's it, I'm going to spiral into depression, my life is over, the world is over, I'm better off dead. That's the one good thing about the psychopathic mind. They will not surrender to pain. However, because they are not pleasing to Allah with their actions during this process, they never really get rid of their inferiority complex or their traumas. They keep resurfacing because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants them to continuously face what they're running away from. And chasing success and fame and everything like this only brings them back to the same point of trauma when someone triggers them. Okay, for example, they may meet someone who is jealous or envious of them, and they say something like, oh honey, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget that you came from nothing. Don't forget that your father is this person and you come from this ethnicity and you belong to this culture or this community. Don't forget that your father was a drug addict. Don't forget that your mother was in prison. Don't forget this and don't forget that. All this fame and all these riches. Don't get rid of where you actually came from. There will be people who give them those digs. They will be very envied by people who see this level of success. And people will humble them by reminding them of their trauma and their pain. Now, people who have inferiority complexes already hate people, or the majority of people, because they believe that the majority of people look down upon them. Okay, so when they go through life, they go carrying that hate. And that's why they don't care about people's feelings. That is why they are able to be successful as people in power, because they take advantage of people and treat them like slaves to get to their ultimate goal. And they treat them like that because it makes them feel better to be the ones with the upper hand. So when people look up to them and respect them for their level of success, they see it as prime time to take revenge on everyone because they believe they're now better than everyone else. They can now look down upon other people, and that's why these people who have inferiority complexes become so arrogant when they reach their goals. But with arrogance comes humbling experiences from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until they learn that it's not about this false self that they've created for themselves. It's about addressing self-worth and self-value. And Allah keeps pushing them to a healing journey that most of them do not want to start. Okay, that's the issue with psychopaths. They just get worse and worse and worse because when they attain a certain level of success, they get hungry for more. And when they realize that they managed to get there by trampling on everyone and, like I said, committing fraud, scamming people, they just do more of it. More and more and more of it until they become hideous people. Like really, really awful, crazy, psychopathic people. So the difference between psychopaths and narcissists in this dynamic, where they act upon trauma and pain, is that narcissists are not as smart as psychopaths. Narcissists are known to not be very intelligent when it comes to manipulating people. They can only do it short term. But psychopaths have a higher level of IQ. And that's why they're admired, because they're very driven and focused on what they want from life, even though their behaviour is abhorrent. Okay? Narcissists can fool people, but their mask falls off very quickly. The psychopath eventually becomes very overt in their psychopathy. They don't care that people look at them as psychopaths because they achieve a level of success most people can only dream of. So by that point, they don't care what people think of them. Narcissists need multiple sources of supply, Whereas the psychopath is more focused on what he or she wants, and they work really hard until they get it. Narcissists are focused on temporary things in life that don't really get them far, but the psychopath does. Okay? And that's why they are hailed as very smart, intelligent people, because they know how to get what they want. Unlike the narcissist, who keeps fumbling everything in life. They self-sabotage everything. They chase this supply, and then they go to that supply, and then they hoover that supply. They've got back burner supplies. That's why the narcissists, especially the covert ones, never really are successful. And if they are successful, it's very short term, because they self-sabotage their businesses as well and everything, because they cannot focus on one thing. Psychopaths can, and that's what makes them smarter. And narcissists also suffer more from abandonment issues. So they have to secure so many sources of supply to make sure they're never alone, right? They're never without supply. They're never stranded. They're never in need. So they constantly need sources of supply to keep them going through life. They can't survive without sources of supply, and that's why when they end a relationship, they are already in another one. There is no gap in between relationships, because they are so terrified of being without a life support machine. Covert narcissists in particular are extremely codependent because they depend on other people to survive. Okay, so it's not just empathic codependence or toxic codependence who have that trait. Covert narcissists are extremely codependent. They can never be self-sufficient enough to go through life independently. They need people. They need things. They need money. They need status and fame. Without it, they don't believe that they're worth anything. And unfortunately, victims take this personally. So when you see your spouse quickly jump into another relationship as soon as your one ends, when victims take this personally, you go through life carrying a trauma that's not yours. It doesn't belong to you. This is their nature. This is what they do. And they do the same with businesses. They will jump to another business as soon as one ends or as soon as one is failing, because they have to have multiple sources of supply. And the quicker you realize this, the quicker you're going to heal, because it's not your fault and it's not got anything to do with you. This is how they survive. They do the same thing with jobs, with families, with their employees. They do the same thing with so many people. The psychopath, however, doesn't need to do that, because they put their all into one victim or one cause or one mission. So when a psychopath is pursuing someone, they don't have back burners. They don't have other people who distract them, because when they focus on someone, it's the cream of the crop. Okay, it's the prime source of supply, unlike the narcissist, who will chase anything. They'll chase their back burners, toxic people, they'll chase other narcissists, they'll chase all sorts of people, just to secure endless supply. But the psychopath is smarter, because they know exactly who to target, and they know that that source of supply, if they have it, it's enough. Right? It's such a valuable source of supply, and they don't stop working until they get it. And that goes with business, status, fame, money, position, everything. That's why they're successful. That's why psychopaths often have very high-level empath spouses, because they like to target people who have a lot of empathy, or they target people who bring a lot of value to their life. They don't have to be religious, and they don't have to be highly empathic. They just have to be very valuable to their life, and people who add a lot of value to their mission and to their cause. So for example, if someone has an inferiority complex from being dark-skinned, then the source of supply will be a very beautiful light-skinned person. And if the inferiority complex comes from being poor when growing up, they will target someone wealthy to marry, or someone from a completely different culture that's perceived highly in society. And they become so obsessed with achieving this goal that they will stalk you, they will follow you everywhere, they will keep tabs on you, they will act strangely around you until they get you. And they're fantastic at love bombing, these people. Okay? The psychopath, if you thought the narcissist was great at love bombing, you haven't met a psychopath yet. The psychopath is the most charming person you will ever come across. And they love bomb you in a very elegant, subtle way that makes you fall in love with them very quickly. And the difference as well between narcissists and psychopaths is that psychopaths do have things to offer you. So they will offer you a better lifestyle. They will offer you some incentive to be with them, unlike the narcissist who could be broke, jobless, and an absolute bum. But because they're love bombing you so much and giving you so much attention, which is something you've been starved of all your life, you'll accept them. That's the difference. The psychopath has something to offer you that will tempt you to be with them, and it reels you into their trap. So if you are a cure to their inferiority complex, they will give you the world. But when they have you, life is hell, because they never let you escape. You are in their clutches for eternity, basically, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rescues you from that psychopath. Because they depend on you now to keep their status active and to keep it high. Without you, they lose their reputation, they lose a lot. And losing very prime sources of supply is very triggering for them. Psychopaths will have crazy collapses when they lose their cream of the crop victims. Okay? And it's really interesting actually how this dynamic folds out. And I'm going to walk you through it, inshallah, to make it as clear as possible. But this is how it works with them, okay? Because unlike narcissists who can just jump to different sources of supply immediately, psychopaths need to start all over again and pursue this journey of finding the cream of the crop who is now better than you. So if you are the victim, a psychopath has lost, they're going to really struggle to find a replacement, especially if you ticked all their boxes. Especially if you added a lot of value to their life and raised their status. They will struggle, and that's why they don't let you go. That's why the people who are stuck with their abusers are often victims of psychopaths. Okay, because narcissists will often reverse discard you or discard you and so on and so forth because they haven't really invested much in their victims. But malignant narcissists and psychopaths will not let you go easily, if at all, because they invested so much into obtaining you. Okay, they spent a long time observing you before they even approached you. They study their victims very well before they approach them. Don't think it's like, oh, love at first sight. No, psychopaths often notice you way before you even meet them, especially if it's in the workplace or you're related to them, or, you have the same social circle and so on. They observe you for a very long time to make sure that you are the cream of the crop. So that when they invest in you and they put their all into pursuing you, they know that they have made the right decision. Okay? They don't like to make the wrong decision when it comes to their victims. Now, they do have back burner supplies later down the line when they see that you have lost your value in their life. So when the value is being lost because you're standing up for yourself and you no longer become that compliant, maybe you've lost your looks because of all the stress they've put you through, maybe you lose your money, maybe you get blocked from an inheritance, or whatever it is that they were anticipating to have or obtain from you. If you lose that, that's when they'll go to a backup source of supply who they might know from work, they might know from the past. Could be an ex that they might recycle. Until that happens, you will be the sole focus of their life, and not in a good way. Okay, their obsession will make your life a living hell. They're very suffocating to live with. They're very difficult to live with. And you'll also be scared of them because of this obsession they have with you. So many people report that this psychopath doesn't cheat on them. They don't speak to other men or other women. They just want their victim to be in front of their face as much as possible. They need to know what you're doing at all times. They have to go with you everywhere. They can't let you do things alone. They track you. They follow you. They stalk you. They will hack into your devices. They will follow you everywhere in the house. They just always need to know what you're doing at all times. Because you're so valuable to them, they can't lose you. And depending on what the trauma is, or the inferiority complex is, or what the pain is that they carry, it will manifest in their behaviour. It will come out. And they will use religion against you if it's a religious partner they wanted, or if they wanted religious control. And if it's other things like attention that they want, or money or status, then you're going to see that come out in their actions. They're going to really make it obvious as to what they need you there for, but you'll feel trapped. They're only nice to you when they get what they need from you. And at all other times, they have to be very demanding when it comes to the love that they want from you, the attention they want from you, the respect they want from you. Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, because they're very strange like this, it's very difficult to love them. It's very difficult to respect them because they're acting from trauma. They're very emotional. And sometimes emotion doesn't come out in tantrums and rages and crying and screaming. Sometimes an emotional person is very locked off, very emotionally cold, because their trauma and their pain makes them like that. They cannot express their emotions properly. And just because they remain cold and silent doesn't mean they're not emotional. Behind those eyes, they are. They just don't know how to express them. They can't do any of that. They have a limit when it comes to emotional availability, but their pursuals are always based on their emotions and how they feel. And psychopaths always believe that their emotional response is the logical response. When it comes to business, when it comes to, being a CEO or a manager or, things outside the house, they're very logical. They know exactly how to manipulate people's emotions to get what they want. Okay, these are very clever people. Like I said, they have emotional intelligence that's supported with logic. And this is what makes them believe that they are normal people. Remember what I told you before in the podcast, that the traumatized psychopath doesn't see anything wrong with their behaviour. They believe they're doing the right thing at all times. They believe they're doing right by themselves, and they believe they're normal. They don't see anything wrong with themselves. They do have a level of delusion that comes from their qareen. The malignant psychopath, however, is very intentional with the evil they do in life. They know they're abnormal. They know there's something majorly wrong with them. And like I said, that's a podcast for another day, inshallah. Now, the question that many of you may ask is, why is it that people can go through the same trauma, the same pain, the same horrible experiences as these people did, but turn out to be empaths, right? In a family, you'll have siblings who have gone through the same horror, the same abuse, the same neglect. But why is it that some people become covert narcissists? Why is it that some people become psychopaths? And why is it that some people in the same family turn out to be empaths? And the answer is simple. It's the influence the qareen has on someone and the moral decision the nafs takes. So empaths tend to learn from the experience and make that decision to never be like their parent, to never be like their abuser. So they take a different path in life where they aim to become the complete opposite of what they grew up to see. The codependent individual normalizes the behaviour, and they continue that cycle of people pleasing and tolerating abuse because it's all they know. Psychopaths grow up angry, and they can be very bitter and vengeful and take it out on others and make other people pay for their trauma. Or they will normalize the behaviour of their abusers and act the same way. They don't see anything wrong with it. Narcissists, especially covert narcissists, will copy the behaviour of their abusers and their parents, and they will put their spouses and children through the same abuse they went through. But unlike the psychopath, they don't perceive this as love. They just believe that everyone deserves to go through what they went through. Okay? Now, how you perceive trauma and pain determines how much control your qareen has over you. So if you are very vengeful and bitter, the qareen will jump on that train and completely control you. If you perceive your trauma and pain as something to grow from and learn from, maybe it triggers a healing journey or a path to find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your qareen will have less of an influence over you. It will continue to fight you because it hates the fact that you want to heal and have a connection with Allah. But because you have a level of control over your qareen, you will not suffer the same way narcissists and psychopaths suffer with their waswas. They have it the worst. Because qareens find it very easy to control and manipulate people who are experiencing low vibrational energies from their emotions, like anger, severe stress, low faith, despair, grief, anxiety, worries. If you're a chronic overthinker, if you're a chronic worrier, then the qareen is going to take over your mind and control you. And if you act upon those thoughts, you can become highly narcissistic or psychopathic. Okay? So to explain this spiritual journey clearly, I'm going to use the example of Joe Goldberg from the Netflix series You. And I thought this to be a good example because during the entire series, he has a conversation with his qareen. Okay, so viewers might look at it as constant intrusive thoughts. I saw it as him having conversations with his qareen, and he was acting upon what he was told. So it shows you really well what someone is capable of doing when they obey this soldier of Iblis. Now, if you haven't seen the series, it's fine, you don't need to. I will explain it as clearly as possible, but it's something you can apply to yourself. If you know you're a psychopath or you have psychopathic tendencies, to better understand yourself. And you can also apply the description of this personality disorder to people you may know in your life to understand them better as well. Okay? And it's actually interesting that they called the series You, because you is the victim he hones in on. Okay, it's all about you, the victim, the cream of the crop. And you will understand how he just pours his all into obtaining a victim who he perceives as very, very high value. And this traumatized psychopath is a very complex and confusing personality type. And unfortunately, it's more common than you'd like to know. Okay, there are so many of them in society, which makes it really important for you to understand how they operate. And when you understand how they operate, you can protect yourselves from them. And if you're the psychopaths, then this information will help you protect yourself against your qareen. So I'll break it down as much as I can, and I pray inshallah you will benefit. So in this show, the main character Joe Goldberg isn't portrayed as someone who suddenly turns psycho. The show frames him as being shaped over time by his childhood trauma, his neglect, and learned behaviour. So Joe grew up in a violently abusive home. So his father regularly abused his mother, and Joe witnessed it repeatedly. So as a child, he was emotionally neglected, and he learned that violence equals protection. He shot and killed his father to save his mother, And this early experience warped Joe's understanding of love and safety, and it became normal. So after killing his father for abusing his mother, Joe was placed in foster care and group homes. So these environments were cold and unstable, they lacked consistent affection, and they reinforced the idea that people always leave. So this fueled Joe's intense fear of abandonment, which later turns into obsession. He was then taken in by Mr. Mooney, the bookstore owner, who became a twisted father figure. Mr. Mooney locked Joe in a glass cage as punishment. He justified cruelty as a way to build character, and he taught Joe to suppress his emotions and endure abuse. So this normalized confinement and control for Joe. This directly influenced how he later treated others. So think about abusers who love to lock their victims in the house or lock them in rooms. They would have gone through something similar when they were younger because it worked on them. They normalized that kind of confinement to, maintain a level of control. So Joe grows up believing that love means sacrifice at any cost, control disguised as care, and protecting someone even against their own will. So he doesn't see himself as an evil person. He now sees himself as the hero of his own story, which is one of the most unsettling aspects of his character. The show also shows that Joe is highly intelligent and articulate, and this allows him to rationalize horrific acts. He narrates his behaviour as morally justified, and he avoids accountability by reframing violence as necessity. So this combination makes him dangerous. So Joe didn't become a psychopath out of nothing. He is the product of early trauma, abusive authority figures, emotional deprivation, neglect, and a learned belief that control equals love. So who were his victims? So in the show, Joe doesn't choose victims randomly. He becomes obsessed with people who fit a psychological pattern tied to his need for love, control, and purpose. So he targets people whom he believes need saving. He interprets signs of loneliness, trauma, insecurity, or difficult relationships as evidence that he is uniquely capable of helping them. So for example, in his first target, Beck, he saw that she struggled with self-esteem and complicated friendships. With Quinn, she appeared to understand the person he was while hiding her own emotional instability and vulnerability. He picked up on that and honed in on it. And with his third victim, Marianne, she tried to escape an abusive partner and build a better life for her daughter, and he capitalized on that. Joe often mistakes empathy for destiny. So when an opportunity arises for him to save someone, he believes it's empathy rather than him victimizing these people. And Joe wasn't simply attracted only to physical appearance. All three of them were very pretty. He also admired people who read books and appreciated literature because he spent so much of his life in a bookshop. So he read a lot, which made him intelligent. And he liked women who had creative ambitions and who also felt complex or difficult to understand. He wanted to use his intelligence to figure out these women so that he could control them. So he romanticizes intelligence because he wants to believe he's found someone extraordinary rather than just another relationship. Now, a major trigger for Joe is uncertainty. So if someone isn't available when he calls, if they're distant or they're focused on other people, like their friends, he becomes even more invested and even more obsessed. So rather than accepting rejection or ambiguity, he convinces himself that what they're distracted with or whom they are distracted by are obstacles preventing him from having true love with them, so he sets out to get rid of them. And he does this by sabotaging their relationships and their jobs and, other things like that. So Joe doesn't fall in love with the real person, he falls in love with an imagined version of them. So once he notices someone, he starts to collect information about them. Their routines, their likes and dislikes, their relationships, their private moments, their relationships with their parents, and so on. And then he uses this information to construct an idealized version of them. So when reality conflicts with the fantasy, He often rationalizes it instead of changing his beliefs. He forces someone to become who he needs them to be because they fit a narrative. They might look the part, they might intellectually play the part and so on, but if there's something missing, he will try to mold them into who he wants them to be. And this is why I said to you earlier that they study you way before they approach you. Okay, they have to know that they're going to be spending their energy and resources in the right person. And even if you meet them online, they will spend ages talking to you before they commit, because they need to know for sure that you are going to be the perfect victim, that you are going to be the person who they can, fulfill their purpose through. Joe's obsessions are less about the other person than about himself. So each new obsession gives him a sense of purpose, a sense of focus, a project to protect, a project to save, someone to justify his increasingly extreme actions. So without someone to obsess over, Joe feels empty and directionless. Okay? Sometimes you'll meet someone who becomes obsessed very quickly, because not only do you tickle their boxes, you are also very easy to manipulate and control. Okay? So like I said, Joe believes that he's the hero of every love story. And you may think you found someone so caring, so loving and so compassionate after you tell them about, the abusive home you come from, the toxic parents you have, the abusive ex, and they're very understanding. It's not always a good thing. Sometimes they victimize you based on the trauma you have experienced. So you have to be very careful with what you share with people very early on when you're getting to know them. So this series portrays Joe's behaviour as being pathological and not romantic. So Joe's narration can be charming and persuasive, but the audience is meant to see the gap between how he views himself as a protector or romantic and what he actually is. That being a stalker, a strange man, a very insecure man, and eventually a serial killer, who justifies his violence on other people to either get rid of them because they're in his way of pursuing these women, or he justifies killing these women when he can't get what he wants from them. That's why these people are dangerous. They don't always start out like this, like the malignant psychopaths. A traumatised psychopath can become a murderer, a serial killer later in life when they are repeatedly rejected, whether it's by multiple people or the same person. For example, like they have a victim who's repeatedly tried to leave them and they manage to get them back. This rejection that happens multiple times can cause them to eventually murder their victim. That's why I tell you guys, if you are in a relationship like that with someone psychopathic and you keep going back, wallahi, it's dangerous for you. It's dangerous because you trigger them every time you try to leave. You either leave and don't come back, or you stay and just learn how to deal with this person until it's safe enough to leave, until Allah rescues you even. But if you repeatedly try to leave dangerous people, it can result in sinister actions. I've warned you many times about this. Don't listen to people who tell you to leave when you're not ready to leave or when it's not safe to leave. Now, a giveaway sign as well of a psychopath who likes you is when they ask you about your support network. So if you tell them, my best friend is really supportive, my parents are supportive, I have a community here, I have aunties and uncles here. When they hear that, they're going to want to take you away from it. A good person will want you to stay where your support network is. A psychopath or a malignant narcissist will want you away from a support system. So they will ask you about that. Who are you close to? What kind of relationship do you have with your parents and your friends and your community? Do you know your local imam? Do you do this and do you do that? Do you have a strong friendship circle, a strong brotherhood, a strong sisterhood? If you say yes, their first mission, if they have decided that you are the cream of the crop and the victim that they absolutely must have, the first mission is to separate you from your support network. A good person knows that in the future you will need them. For example, when you have children, you're going to want to be near your mother, your friends, your aunties and uncles. So they try their best to accommodate for that, okay, because they're understanding and empathic and they have no intention to control and abuse you. But the psychopath will. And that's why many of them want to acquire spouses from abroad, or they move to another city or another state where they are away from their families and away from anyone who could support them. So just be wary of that. It happens a lot. So ultimately, Joe wasn't looking for a real partner. He was looking for someone who he could project an ideal relationship onto. One that confirms his self-image and gives his life some meaning and purpose. So when the real person inevitably fails to match his fantasy and this person who he dreams to be, his obsession often escalates into manipulation and physical violence. So, it proves my point that I've made in previous podcasts that no one is born evil, right? It's learned behaviour, it's trauma, it's pain, it's experiences and everything that leads them to develop this personality disorder. And if they're not careful, traumatised psychopaths can turn malignant with time, especially if they are repeatedly rejected or they get used to sinister behaviour, physical violence, murder. Once that becomes more normalised in their lives, it escalates. And, it's a battle with your qareen. It's a battle with your own nafs at that point. And many people fail, and that's why they escalate into the malignant stage when their nafs descends. Okay, it can descend so low until they become dangerous to society as high-level sociopaths. Sometimes the sociopath is more dangerous than the psychopath, and I'll explain why later, inshallah. But this is why it's important for you to have awareness of this as a traumatized psychopath so that you do not enter the malignant stage, and sometimes there's no coming back from it. And it's also important for victims to be aware that the behavior of traumatized psychopaths can escalate. You have to be warned about that. They're not just going to stay as they are forever. The longer you stay with them and enable them, the worse they're going to get. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts them through a humbling experience, let them go through it so that they learn. You help them by not saving them from their disasters and bad decisions and calamities. Let them go through their own hardships. Because I see a lot of the time the victims try to help and save the psychopath from their own hardships. But these are hardships that come from Allah to rescue them from their own personality disorder, from their own qareen, and to elevate their nafs through this hardship. Stop trying to save psychopaths. Leave them to the lesson that Allah has sent for them as a mercy. So I'm just going to go through a few points so that you can differentiate malignant psychopaths from the traumatized psychopath. And inshallah, I'll dive into more detail about the malignant psychopath in the next podcast. So malignant psychopaths typically lack empathy, and I wouldn't say entirely because I don't believe that someone is 100% void of empathy, because everyone has a soft spot for something or someone, even if it's a pet dog or a pet cat or a pet hamster. Okay, the most malignant psychopath may really love their pet cat, and that's where their empathy goes. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places the lifeline in that soft spot. Okay, that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses to bring that person back to Him. So yes, they are the ones who have the least empathy, but they're not void of it completely. They are emotionally shallow, they do not form genuine attachments to people, and they feel very little to no guilt at all. Okay, so they don't feel that remorse. However, someone like Joe, they do feel things and intensely. So Joe craves to be loved and he wants connection. He feels guilt even though that guilt is misplaced and distorted. and he forms obsessive emotional bonds with people. He also shows antisocial personality disorder traits by being repeatedly violent and breaking laws. He is deceitful and he has a lack of regard for other people's safety. And people who have antisocial disorder have often had it since childhood or adolescence. They're the kids who cause havoc in the streets and they always have the police knocking on the door and all of that. They carry that into their adulthood too. And it's because sometimes it was the only way they ever got attention from people. So if they got in trouble with the police, it would guarantee for them that they get attention from their parents. So antisocial behaviour would be repeated if they got what they needed out of it. And sometimes there's a thrill behind it. There's a thrill that they get from breaking the law, and they find it fun. So, people who grew up in a troubled neighbourhood, for example, often behave like this. And it shows you as well that Joe's violence is selective and justified in his mind because he always got what he needed out of being that way. So he doesn't perceive it as him being reckless or impulsive. It's calculated. Joe also has a fearful, avoidant attachment style, and this develops when a caregiver in childhood is both a source of comfort and terror. Okay, so love and danger become emotionally fused, and this explains why Joe desperately wanted closeness. He panics at abandonment, and he becomes controlling when afraid. He swings often between idealizing and destroying partners. Okay, so to Joe, intimacy feels necessary but unsafe, so he tries to control it instead. Joe also shows signs of CPTSD because of the chronic child abuse, the emotional neglect, and also the trauma that he faced in foster care and when he lived with Mr. Mooney. And this leads to hypervigilance, black and white thinking, emotional detachment under stress, and moral splitting, which means you see yourself as good and everyone else as bad. Okay? So it's important to understand that trauma does not cause violence, but it can distort your perception and emotional regulation when untreated, because that's when your qareen takes over. So your qareen will make you look at the trauma as something to take personally. So it always keeps you in victim mode. And when you're in victim mode all the time, your reality gets distorted because it always makes you look at everything from that lens. So you stay as a victim to your past or your life, and that hinders your progress. It doesn't allow you to elevate because you either carry lots of anger, resentment, and bitterness with you into adulthood, or you always remain a victim who is abused. Okay, you surrender to that life because your qareen has made you believe that you can never escape being a victim. So that's where that comes from. So it's really important to understand that you can change your whole perception of trauma when you understand it, when you detach yourself from what happened. A lot of people take the blame or they take responsibility for what happened in their childhood. So, for example, if they were abused by their parents and they did nothing wrong to their parents, they may take that blame and they may believe that they deserved it. And you go through life carrying that. That's living as a victim. Or, for example, sexual abuse that may have happened to you as a child. You may have believed that you deserved it. It was a punishment from Allah. All these thoughts come into your mind that keep you a victim who is angry and doesn't understand their trauma. You carry that. And then your qareen says, great, I can use this to my advantage. I will keep them thinking this way all their life so they never heal. And that is what PTSD is. It is a mental health disorder that comes from your qareen that keeps you thinking this way to the end of your life. And then before you know it, you've done nothing with your life, you haven't fulfilled any purpose, you've wasted your life being bitter, resentful, angry, and taking the blame for something that was never your fault to begin with. Now, it's also important to look at how Joe always saw himself as someone who is uniquely insightful. He believed he was unique in a special way, and he always believed that he understands his partner better than they understand themselves. So he was very patronizing and controlling in that manner too. And he always presents himself as someone who truly loves them. Like, I am the only one who loves you like this. I am the only one who will ever love you like this. To brainwash the victim into believing that they will never have this type of love again, because he's trying to normalize this kind of controlling love in their minds. Okay? And when he does this, it protects him from shame, guilt, and seeing himself as the villain. So if he can make them believe that all this is done out of love, this control, this suffocating behaviour, this, the clinginess, the obsession, if he can convince them it's love, then he frees himself from seeing himself as a bad person. Okay? And often people who think they are overly special are those who tend to have this need to always control others. They want people to always look up to them. And Joe's most dangerous trait wasn't his violence. It was his moral rationalization. So, for example, he reframes stalking as devotion. When he follows his victims, when he spies on them, when he tracks them, he said, this is devotion from me, it's care. He reframed control as protection. He would tell them that I'm just protecting you by telling you what to do all the time and making your decisions for you and guiding you because you don't know what's good for yourself. I know what's good for you. You don't know what's good for yourself. That kind of control, he frames it as protection. And murder as necessity. So Joe justifies murdering someone because they were the villain in his story. And according to psychological terms, this is called egosyntonic behaviour, where his actions align with his self-image so they don't feel wrong to him. Okay, that's why he's always convincing and terrifying at the same time. So this series isn't just about a killer. It's a critique of romantic obsession being framed as love. And it's about the nice guy who knows what's best for everyone. Okay? And it also shows you how intelligence and charm can mask danger, and how narration can manipulate the audience's sympathy. So he is able to manipulate the viewer into feeling sorry for him and sympathizing with him when he had to get rid of someone, or when he had to do something so immoral because he'd already created a narrative about his vulnerability and what he needs, and that he's doing everything for the sake of others. He's doing it because he cares for others and loves others. So he was able to manipulate people into believing he was a very good person. And this can be done when you lie to yourself so much about who you are. Because if you lie enough, you'll start to believe your own lies, and then it becomes much easier to convince others of the lie you have told yourself. Okay? So if you keep telling yourself that you are a great person, even though your behaviour says otherwise, it will be easier to convince others that, this isn't bad behaviour. And if you see it as bad behaviour, I'm doing it for the greater good. I'm doing it for this and I'm doing it for that. You speak with conviction, you speak with confidence because you've believed your own lies. You've told yourself that lie so many times, so now it becomes a natural thought to you, a natural belief. Okay, so this show explains why he is the way he is, but it does not excuse his behaviour. As an adult, you are held accountable for everything you do. Your trauma, your childhood, your pain does not excuse your awful behaviour as an adult. You cannot use your childhood trauma to inflict abuse on others. When you're aware of your childhood trauma, you go and get help for it. Even when you're codependent, you cannot constantly blame your childhood trauma for the way you are. This is weakness. This is your qareen keeping you in a pathetic state of always being a victim. Being a victim is the lowest state you can be in. It's the weakest state. And that's what your qareen wants to keep you in. Okay, so when you're constantly blaming childhood trauma, blaming everything that happened to you for you turning out the way you are, but you're not getting help to improve in your character, you are enabling the narcissism of your qareen. Okay, there's so much awareness now about codependency and toxic codependency and narcissism and psychopathy. There's so much out there to help you. But if you decide to listen to your qareen and stay as a victim for the rest of your life, you will suffer. You will suffer terribly, because you'll always be a prisoner to this soldier of Iblis. Okay? And if you are highly narcissistic or psychopathic and you want validation and admiration and love and connection with people, then know that if you continue with this kind of behaviour, you will eventually self-sabotage everything. Because no one could possibly stick around to tolerate this. And that's what happened with Joe. He wanted all of these things, but his behaviour would sabotage all his efforts. And he would be left with nothing. So when you continuously use trauma as your justification for all this terrible behaviour, you will go downhill. And it will lead you to more guilt and continued violence. Okay, you'll lose more empathy over time. It will be harder to repent. It will be harder to find it within yourself to seek forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the people whom you've harmed. You'll become more entitled to everything that you want. And your qareen will also make you more delusional than you already are at the moment. Okay, he will make you believe that you're doing the right thing, that there's nothing wrong with you, and to keep going. And before you know it, you've entered the malignant stage and you're in all sorts of trouble. When you reach the malignant stage, the inner conflict between your nafs and your qareen starts to quieten. Okay, you don't hear it as loudly as you did before, because your nafs now has entered the evil stage. And you become shaitan ins. And when you become shaitan ins, there's no longer that inner battle. You just become naturally evil. You become the soldiers of Iblis in human form. Okay, you don't need to listen to waswas anymore. You just get up and automatically do the wrong thing. You automatically make the wrong decisions. It's very hard to come back from that. The people who need to come back from that because they are self-aware and they realize what they've done and they no longer want to be that person, they are the ones who struggle the most to change. They have to make the most efforts to change. But once you get to that stage, it becomes extremely difficult. Allah will always give you a way. He'll always give you lifelines. But when your nafs has descended to the level of shaitan ins, it takes a lot to get out of that. And you've put yourself there. But Allah helps everyone who tries. So as long as you're trying, you will find lifelines come to you. You will jump in the well thinking it's funny, and then you find no one to help you get out. But Allah will send a lifeline, maybe a passerby, to help you out if you're sincere in wanting to change. Because when you get to the level of malignant psychopath, shaitan ins level, people won't help you. People will avoid you at that point. And you will despair. You will have such a narcissistic collapse and you'll lose all your hope. That's when most narcissists and psychopaths crash. It's the point when they realize that they've sabotaged their whole life with their own hands. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Hashr, verse 2, هو الذي أخرج الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب من ديارهم لأول الحشر ما ظننتم أن يخرجوا وظنوا أنهم مانعتهم حصونهم من الله فأتاهم الله من حيث لم يحتسبوا وقذف في قلوبهم الرعب يخربون بيوتهم بأيديهم وأيدي المؤمنين فاعتبروا يا أولي الأبصار. He is the one who expelled the disbelievers of the people of the book from their homes for their first banishment ever. You never thought they would go, and they thought their strongholds would put them out of Allah's reach. So this is referring to their arrogance. But the decree of Allah came upon them from where they never expected, and He cast horror into their hearts, so they destroyed their houses with their own hands and the hands of the believers. So take a lesson from this, O people of insight. So this is a warning for those who don't want to change and for the arrogant. And it's also hope for victims who believe they can't escape their abusers. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make them destroy what they have. He will make them destroy the homes that you also live in to free you. Okay? So don't worry about that. But this is more of a warning to those who keep rebelling and they keep escalating in their bad behaviour. Now, other traits can be intense jealousy. Okay, this is very common among all psychopaths. And again, they frame control as love, and they see everyone as a threat. They're jealous of anyone who comes around you, and they abuse to prevent loss rather than seek pleasure. Okay, so when they lash out physically, when they have their tantrums, when they throw things, when they, go into their satanic rages, it's not because they seek pleasure from it. It's because they feel threatened in that moment, and they're doing it to prevent you leaving. And they do this with fear. Okay, they're instilling fear within you so that you stay and don't abandon them. And then later on, when they explain this behavior to you, they will say things like, I had no choice, or you gave me no choice, you made me do it. This is how I show you how much you mean to me. This is how I show you how much I love you. I hit you because I love you. I slapped you because I care. I don't want you going out looking like that. I don't want you doing this. I don't want you doing that. When I hit you, it was all your fault. And if you really understood me, you'd see I'm doing this for love. You'd see I'm doing this to protect you. You'd see I'm doing this for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You'd see I'm doing this because it's my Islamic duty. All right, so they justify abuse to put you back in your place as well. Okay, lots of men do this. Lots of women do this as well, but men do it more frequently. They physically abuse their wives and then tell them they love them after, or tell them that, they want intimacy after, like it's nothing, because in their minds it's normalized behavior. And this mindset appears frequently in real domestic violence cases, especially when there's stalking involved. And this is what leads people to homicide. And people like this are frightening because to codependents, these people could sound reasonable, convincing, because they use emotional language. They center themselves as the protectors and the people who care for them. The other day, someone asked me, how can some people become psychopaths when they had nice parents? Okay, this happens sometimes too. And there are people who become psychopathic, and it's not because of abuse that they endured in their childhood at the hands of their parents, but because of emotional neglect, due to, for example, parents being too busy. Both parents are working, they come home, they feed the child, they'll do their homework with them, they'll read them a bedtime story, put them to bed, and all of that. Just, the normal mundane things that parents do with their children. There's no real connection. There's no bonding. They don't sit with the child to really listen to them and find out what's going on internally. They don't have long conversations. They don't have deep discussions about how they feel. They don't encourage the child to express themselves. There's not that much affection. And even if there is affection, those deep discussions are missing. So, for example, if a child is going through, a hard time with other kids at school, he doesn't feel heard or seen, and he deals with that problem on his own. Especially when he sees or he's told himself that his parents are too busy. He feels guilty for unloading his problems onto them. So he internalizes it and decides to deal with it himself, and then he goes to school, he gets into trouble, he's fighting with other kids, or he's absorbing everything because he's the one being bullied, and things can escalate. And we go back to the point that I made earlier of psychopaths who, become that way because of being bullied at school. So their parents might be fine. Everything in their personal life might be fine, but at school, they get picked on, and the feelings of revenge and anger and bitterness, they grow from there rather than from the home. So that's how it happens. And in many cases, parents don't notice this until much later, until they enter the teenage phase of life, the adolescent period. The rebellion starts to come out in that time because the parents were not aware of what the child was going through at school. And sometimes parents will tell them that the child is, being problematic at school, and they'll just put the child through extra tutoring because his problems are making him not do well in exams and things like that. So they just give him extra tutoring and extra time, but the core issue is not addressed. Okay? And some children, when they are abused by their parents, they turn into a complete nightmare. That's why so many parents have, children who are unbearable. They lash out, they're screaming, shouting, tantrums all the time. They don't listen. They swear at their parents. This is rebellion. And then it gets worse when they reach adolescence. That's when, they're getting involved in gangs, street crime, they're bringing the police, weed, drugs, everything. Because they're rebelling against the abuse that was inflicted on them as children, whether it's from their parents, their uncles, their caregivers, whoever it is. They will rebel so hard during that period of time to show all that hate that they have inside towards their abusers. Some children can't hide it. Some children are very emotionally reactive from a very young age, and they grow up very problematic. And then they go into foster care because the parents can't deal with them anymore. And then when they go into foster care, they have even more trauma there from the caregivers who are abusive there too, and then the other kids who are also problematic. They end up fighting between each other. They end up, getting each other into drugs and all sorts of issues. So it's an escalation from one problem into another. So children who do express themselves emotionally often get punished for that, and they end up in a worse place. Or they get disciplined for expressing their emotions, and then that discipline escalates into even more chaotic behaviour, because now they're not just rebelling against the abuse, they're also rebelling against not being heard and being punished for speaking. So in order to be heard, they act out in horrific ways. That's why you get, teenagers doing the worst social things. They're awful when they reach that stage of just, I don't care anymore. My parents don't care about me. No one's listening to me. I'm not being heard. To hell with life. I'm going to do what I want. And then they cause chaos in society, chaos in the home, chaos at school. They get expelled from school, and then they become lost. And when they're lost, they just end up in circles where there are lots of psychopaths. And they all come together to form groups. And that's why we have, the social issues we do. And subhanAllah, I see a lot of these kids, when they're older, they do convert to Islam later. Whether that's in jail or whether it's the right way. They meet good people who take them in and they teach them true Islam and they change their lives. And that's proof right there that psychopaths can change. Look at all these people who are so famous, who used to be that way inclined. They converted to Islam and they completely changed their lives around. When people tell me, it's impossible for psychopaths to change, for narcissists to change. No, look at all these reverts. They came from dark backgrounds and they changed their lives around. So it can be done. And when Allah knows that someone's trauma came at the hands of other people, Allah will guide you. Allah will help you because He knows it's not your fault. So He will guide you to a healing journey and an educational journey where you can understand everything you went through. Because when you can make it make sense, it's much easier after that to find Allah and to have a spiritual connection with Him. But if you can't make sense of what you went through, no matter how much you pray, you will feel empty and disconnected. And that's why so many people have converted to Islam, because when they made sense of what they went through, they found Allah. It's amazing. And subhanAllah, I see this a lot. So it's just a matter of wanting a different life and wanting to change. It's not permanent. It's a personality disorder that can change. Your nafs can change. Your nafs can elevate or it can descend. You're not stuck with a personality disorder all your life just because you have it. You can come out of it. But it needs work. It needs a lot of introspection. It needs self-reflection. It needs, you to take on the good advice of people. It needs you to take on the support of good people so they can help you get there. So yes, trauma is not required for psychopathy. Lots of psychopaths have reported stable homes, no abuse, and good parents. Their issue wasn't learned violence or abuse. It's emotional absence. And in Islamic psychology, psychopathy is a combination of neurological issues, and that refers to how the brain develops with its programming from childhood. For example, this is when violence is normalized. Okay, you are programmed to believe that everything that you see, all that abuse, is normal behavior. And if you grew up in a religious home, then religious trauma may have been inflicted on you. You may have been told that you're going to hell because of the way you are. You may have been told that all the abuse that's been inflicted on you is a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You may have been told that, you're a bad person in the eyes of Allah, and so on. And also, of course, the spiritual crisis with the qareen. So you're always in a battle with the qareen because your qareen wants you to see life from its lens. And you're trying to do the right thing, but if your qareen overpowers you, then it's going to take over your nafs. Okay, that's how psychopathy develops in Islamic psychology. Someone also asked me how to deal with adult children who are psychopaths. So the parents are empaths, and the adult children are the narcissists and the psychopathic abusers. So, of course, this is a hardship, and inshallah I will do a separate podcast about adult children being the abusers in your lives. So, I'd like to go back for a moment and speak about the children who were bullied at school, or who were bullied by their cousins or their neighbours or whoever, and who made an intention and a promise to themselves that they would be so successful or so famous or so wealthy. Yeah, those children who had inferiority complexes. This group of psychopaths, I just want to speak about why they receive admiration from society despite their psychopathic behaviour. Okay, so this is a type of psychopathy that does not involve violence or a romantic dynamic. Usually these psychopaths are fine with their families. They don't actually abuse their families. But when they go to work, when they need to reach a specific goal or milestone, that's when all the bad behaviour comes out and people notice it. However, it's praised. Okay, so when modern psychologists talk about psychopathic traits in this category, they usually mean low emotional reactivity, fearlessness, charm and confidence, shallow affect, which means they're not easily shaken, they can stand firmly on their own 2 feet. They are great manipulators, so they do very well in marketing and also in sales. They don't experience much guilt, and their logical ways of thinking. Okay, they're very logical when it comes to problem solving. So a lot of people have these traits, but when it's coupled with psychopathic behaviour, where empathy is lacking, then it can come across as brutal but powerful, intimidating but inspiring. And the reason why there's such a contrast between how these people are perceived is because they grew up hating people, perhaps, if they were bullied at school. Maybe they learned from an early age that people aren't nice, especially when they were bullied by people they liked or the children they looked up to in school. They learned that people can't be trusted and it's not safe to be vulnerable or kind to people in case people take advantage of you, stab you in the back, and so on. Some children may also have been teased because they weren't good looking. So they grew up with a hate for good looking people. That's the inferiority complex they have. Some people grew up, like I said before, very poor. So they grew up hating the rich. And even though they fight so hard to be rich, deep down they hate the rich. And if they aren't successful in becoming rich, so they work day and night, but Allah doesn't will for them to reach their goal, then that hate will deepen. Okay, it will get worse. They'll hate the rich even more. And they will set out to scam the rich all the time. They will do everything in their power to take what they want from the rich. And they do this by manipulating them and getting into business with them and starting charities with them, asking for donations from them, and then they never actually put that money to charity, they steal it, and there are loads of examples like that. You'll also get people who hate where they come from, the culture they come from, their ethnicity, and then they grow up pretending to be from the ethnicity they admire. The wannabes, right? They completely change their identity, the way they dress, the way they walk, the way they speak, just to look like someone from a specific ethnicity so that they are treated better. And it becomes a mental illness because they start to believe that that's who they really are. They don't live authentically. So the brutality comes from the hate they have for their inferiority complex and where it stems from. And them being inspiring comes from the work they do to reach their goals. Okay, that's why society looks upon them favourably, even though they may not recognise or even see the inferiority complex behind the mask. Okay, behind all this success is a massive inferiority complex. Now, this isn't an issue only for psychopaths. Other people can have inferiority complexes as well. Some empaths can have it, codependents have it, covert narcissists will have it. It's an issue that surfaces in different people for different reasons. However, it's dangerous in psychopaths because they will not stop at anything until they reach a certain goal. And that journey can involve a dangerous process. And in this process, they can harm many people and manipulate people in ways that will cost people lots of money, it will cost people their livelihoods, it will cost people their reputation. They don't care. They have no empathy when it comes to achieving their goals, unlike other people who, will take into account the consequences their actions will have, not just on themselves, but other people as well. So when the psychopath sets their eyes on a goal, they will stop at nothing until they get to it. And it can turn sinister if they find obstacles along the way. So this type of obsession can turn very dark the more they struggle to achieve their goal. They will take more drastic measures to get to where they want in life. Okay, and like I said before, they might resort to sihr. They might resort to violence if they absolutely have to. But the psychopaths who are admired in society are those who didn't need to get to that stage of violence and murder and so on. Okay? They are just people who are admired for their leadership skills. They aren't rattled by conflict. They seem very confident in what they do. They can make hard decisions without emotional distress. They can fire people very easily because they don't have that level of empathy like empaths do. They don't hesitate under pressure. They take risks and, they don't worry about the things empaths would worry about. So they make ruthless but effective calls because they don't feel guilty and they don't have that consideration for the feelings of others. And that's why employers like to take on CEOs who thrive on risk-taking. And psychopaths are also very good at being surgeons because they can stay calm under extreme pressure. You get lots of psychopaths who murder people who operate in the same way. And you'll also find lots of psychopaths in politics and law because of all the lying and manipulation that goes on. And usually the most successful lawyers are psychopaths for that very reason. They also find lots of legal loopholes so that they can achieve their goals. And even if people know that they have found loopholes, they're still admired for their intelligence. Okay? Empaths can't do this because empaths live with integrity, and they struggle to sometimes meet lawyers at the same professional level because they refuse to do what they do to get there. And this is unfair because it's the psychopaths who get praised for strong leadership, confidence, decisiveness, even though the emotional cost to others is invisible. So many people don't see the social consequences of them being like this. And unfortunately, in many businesses and industries, the outcomes matter more than how you get there. So, for example, ethical harm may be dismissed if you achieve the goals. And this allows corrupt people to take the credit for the work. It allows blame shifting to happen. And also the exploitation of people without accountability. So you may be causing social harm, but business owners don't care because you're bringing in the profits. Okay? Now, these people can operate like this because they are emotionally absent. Like I said, they're very emotionally avoidant. So they may look like they don't take things personally, or they remain calm during crises, or they bounce back quickly from hardships. These traits and this behaviour is often praised by people as mental toughness. Okay, wow, they're so mentally strong and they can survive anything, and the psychopath is hailed. However, this isn't resilience for the majority. It's emotional absence, so they're not coping, they're simply not affected by it. They're very numb emotionally, and they can take more hits than the average person because they're not thinking about their feelings or the feelings of others. So they can soldier through things that empaths look at as impossible because they can take on such high levels of stress and workload and work pressure that is crippling for the average person. Okay, but they can do it and they can manage it because they bend the rules without guilt. They break the rules all the time. They lie without feeling bad about it. They rationalize harm as a necessity. So essentially, those who are willing to cross lines quietly often outperform those who don't. And they are often protected by the institutions who benefit from them. And this includes the religious ones as well. Sometimes, institutions will back the psychopath and they will encourage forgiveness for the psychopath if they're caught doing something unethical. You will find religious leaders rally around this person to support them. During a scandal, they try to save their reputation and they try to divert the news away from them to help them because they benefit from them. And for this reason, the punishment for the psychopath or the consequences are delayed. And this is strategic because the longer the punishment is delayed, the more likely it is that people will forget about it. And eventually, most psychopaths will get caught and they will get involved in scandals because people confuse confidence for competence and because people value outcomes over ethics and because people praise emotional detachment as strength. And of course, everyone loves a charming person, and psychopaths are the best masters of the art of charm. And that's why they win and get ahead of people in life. So, of course, empathy, cooperation, and trust is better for the long run for every institution. However, highly empathic people don't tend to dominate these roles and positions that psychopaths often have because they second guess themselves and they hesitate more than psychopaths do. They carry moral distress when they see something wrong or unethical. They burn out a lot faster. They can't handle the amount of stress psychopaths can take on. They often need time out for mental health as well, which is something, psychopaths don't do. They will show up every single day, even if they're at breaking point, even if they're suicidal. They will show up to work. Whereas the empath keeps needing time out for their mental health and for this and for the stress, and it's irritating for institutions to deal with. They know they will not profit as much from empaths as they do psychopaths. So during interviews, they do check for personality. So an empath may be more qualified than a psychopath for the job or for the high position. However, if the person who is interviewing them notices that they are empathic, they're quite soft, they're very kind, they will choose the less qualified psychopath for the role, because their personality is required to be successful. Okay, they value that psychopathic personality over the empathic personality because of what they can achieve from this person working in that position. All right. So it's really interesting to look at it from this perspective, because a lot of people find it unfair that empaths are not in high positions. They always say that empaths can do so much if they were in high positions, but it's intentionally done by institutions to employ psychopaths. Okay, it's done deliberately. And again, it's done in religious institutions as well. That's why you rarely find empathic sheikhs in the courts. They're always ruthless. You'll find the minority who are very kind-hearted here and there, but they're not liked by the majority. They are not respected like the tough ones are. There's a reason for all of this. It's strategic. And you'll also find, again, that charming people do better in interviews than those who don't have the charm. Okay, they do better in dates as well. When you meet someone for the first time for marriage, they are more likely to be chosen than someone who wasn't charming, because they're shy, or they have self-respect and they don't want to be flirting with you in the first meeting. Lots of women especially fall for the charming man, and they feel excitement, they feel giddy, but it's not good. It's not good to trust someone who is so quickly and openly charming. It's usually a cover for a whole load of issues. Think of Joe Goldberg again, who was so charming and nice and sweet, and he helped people, he helped the neighbours, he helped strangers. Everyone loved him. Everyone thought he was an amazing, fantastic, empathic human being. But in relationships, he was something else. He was nice until he didn't get what he wanted. And that's when all the psychopathic behaviour would emerge. And you'll also get people who have inferiority complexes act out in their psychopathic ways when they're married to you. You could be in a romantic relationship, you could be living with someone like a roommate, it could be your father, your mother, your siblings, your friends. They will treat you so badly because of their inferiority complex if they believe you're better than them. Maybe they're jealous of your looks, they're jealous of your intelligence, they're jealous of your iman, they're jealous of your knowledge, your education, your job position. This inferiority complex can also manifest in disgusting behaviour. It can escalate to physical harm, and they will verbally abuse you. You'll get all of it. And lots of people who suffer from inferiority complexes and they're jealous of their own partners are the ones who usually commit homicide. They're the ones who, they do the most horrific things. It is so important that you never marry someone who has an inferiority complex, especially when you have what they don't have. You need to be very alert when you speak to someone for marriage, because if you pick up on their insecurities and you have what they don't have, believe me, they're going to humble you in the process and abuse you as punishment. for having it. That's the difference between the narcissist or the psychopath who wants a trophy. They won't abuse you for being the trophy. They will actually encourage you to be more educated and be more beautiful and be more successful because they brag about you and you add to their self-worth. And the psychopath or the narcissist who suffers from inferiority complex, if they suffer from an inferiority complex, they may have pursued you because they think that, wow, you're amazing, this person could raise my value, but because they do not value the trophy, they hate the trophy eventually, okay? You remind them always of what they don't have or who they're not, and they will punish you for it. They'll hate you for it. You are a constant mirror to their face that reminds them that you are better than them, and they will do everything to sabotage what you have or who you are. These people are very envious and they want to take everything good away from you, especially that one thing that they feel insecure about. Okay, that's why they try to destroy your faith in Allah. They try to destroy your looks by feeding you junk food all the time and not allowing you to go to the gym. They stop you from pursuing your education so that you don't get more qualified for a better job. They sabotage your work. They sabotage everything because of their inferiority complex. You are putting yourself in danger if you ever marry someone who shows you early on that they have one of these. Okay, be warned, they are extremely nasty. And this can turn sinister. And like I said, it can escalate to the malignant stage the longer you stay with them and put up with it. The psychopaths who don't hurt anyone, whether it's physical violence or murder or homicide, they have no need to control or dominate others aggressively because they are already powerful in who they are as people. So, for example, you may have women who are married to psychopathic men who never harm them physically because their loud personalities are scary enough. They just need to shout, they just need to rage, and everyone lines up in order to serve and obey the psychopath. So they get what they need without having to lift a finger and harm anyone in the household. And later on, when these women want divorces, they use this in their defense and they tell the imam, I've been a good husband, I've never assaulted her, I've never laid a finger on her, and so on and so forth, to get the sympathy from the imams. And it's true, they wouldn't have done that, but the imams are not acknowledging all of the psychological, spiritual, religious and emotional abuse that went on instead. They know sheikhs and imams will advise women to make the marriage work and to go back home and all of that because he's not a physical abuser. So they have that under their belt at the time of divorce to argue their case and keep their source of supply, their prime source of supply. Okay, inshallah, I will go into more of this later, but I hope this podcast has given you a good understanding of the different types of traumatized psychopaths. Lots of people say to me, can you give us other examples outside of marriage and, family relationships that we can relate to? So I'm trying to include more examples of, narcissists and psychopaths in the workplace and so on, so that they can help more people. So inshallah, that's given you some clarity on the reasons, traumas and motives behind this particular personality disorder. And I know many of you are dealing with it, so inshallah you found it beneficial and helpful. Psychopaths, if you want to heal from this trauma, if you want to get better and elevate your nafs, please go to my healing playlist where there's a lot of information about repentance, fighting your qareen and elevating the nafs. If you need one-to-one counselling and coaching, you can reach out to me and I can coach you through it, inshallah. I'm more than happy to help you. Don't underestimate the power of good therapy and coaching. Okay, it can help you with this process, whether you're a psychopath or a victim of one. Because making sense of everything that happened to you is the first step of healing before you can build a connection with Allah and make amends with other people. I always say this. The good thing about therapy is that it helps you to unpack your childhood trauma and detach yourself from it. So you no longer have to carry it around with you in your adulthood and let it affect your future. Okay, this could be trauma from your teenage years. It could even be trauma from your early adulthood. Okay, whatever it is, therapy can help you break it down, process it, understand it, so you can move on from it. This is necessary work that needs to be done. It's considered to be inner work and self-development work. Without this, you will struggle to heal properly. Okay, you need to make sense of what you went through so that you can rebuild your life. You can rebuild an identity for yourself. You can elevate your nafs. You can fight your qareen better. You can empower yourself against the qareen. You can be who you want to be. You can achieve your best self. You can reach your highest self. You will not be able to do this if you do not understand what happened to you and if you do not detach from what happened to you. You have to leave it in the past, learn from it, and then rebuild, inshallah. You're not stuck with this disorder. You can break free from it if you want to. That's the key. You have to want to. You have to first acknowledge that something is majorly wrong with you for you to be able to do the work. If you're in denial of it, if you're angry at all of this, you'll be stuck in that situation because your qareen will keep you there and you've obeyed. And you'll just waste your life and your potential to be someone great. And then you'll experience all the narcissistic and psychopathic collapses. It's in podcast 108 to humble you and bring you back to Allah when it's unnecessary to go through all of that if you just decide to make a change before any of that strikes you. Because if it strikes you, it's not going to be easy to deal with. And as for those who are suffering at the hands of psychopaths and narcissists, if you need one-to-one counselling and coaching, I can help guide you through it. And know that the goal while you're in this situation is harm reduction, okay? Harm reduction and self-preservation, not fixing the relationship. And again, don't try to escape because it could be the wrong time to escape. If you try escaping at the wrong time, you will suffer consequences from that. You need to know when to do it and how to do it. And professional guidance is needed for this. So please, please do not let anyone pressure you to leave when you're not ready to or when it's not safe to do so. Navigating psychopathy is not easy. And you need to do it carefully and in a smart manner. I pray the psychopaths who are hearing this will get the help they need. And I also pray for the victims who are suffering at their hands. May Allah protect you, may Allah rescue you, and may Allah change your situation for the better and compensate you. Ameen. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, may Allah bless you. And until the next podcast, inshallah, where I will continue with part 2. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.